Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about how to heal in a raid environment. So we're going to keep this strictly about raiding. We're going to do another video for dungeons, and we're going to do another video talking about talents and stuff like that, maybe another video for consumes. We'll also be doing videos later where we talk about specific raid encounters, so maybe specific encounters in Molten Core, specific encounters in Blackwing Lair. We can also do a video where we talk about the instance holistically. Right, but this is just going to be like a general primer on like how to raid, like what your buttons do, what your role is going to mainly be in raid, and this is going to be kind of like the base that I'm going to give you, and it's going to be something we'll reference in the other videos. That way, when I do like a Molten Core video or something, or when I do a boss specific video, I won't have to kind of go through everything again and answer questions like, oh, why are we using this rank or something like that, right? So we're going to get all the basics down in here, talking about all the spells basically and the situations they'll be used in, and then we'll talk about the specific application of those spells in some of the later videos. And we're going to go through like all the major spells and stuff, so this one's kind of going to be long. I'll try and timestamp it. And that's why we're not doing like any additional stuff. We're going to save like the talents and everything for a different video. So let's get right into it, okay? We will open up the spell book here. We'll start in Discipline. We're not going to go through like all of these necessarily in super detail, but the first thing I want to talk about is the spell, because the spell is going to be very important, and it's a crucial part of you, I would say, as a raider. Now, it's going to depend a little bit in terms of if you're Alliance or Horde, how much dispelling you're actually going to be doing. Alliance have Paladins that have a Dispel that cleanses 3 debuffs, any disease, poison, and magic, I believe. So the only thing they can't do is like curse. So it's very powerful, obviously. And Paladins are just fantastic dispellers. So Alliance gets a bit more help with dispellers. Alliance also tends to run more priests because they run less shamans because they don't need as much Wind Fury, which means that they just have more priests in general to dispel, right? So your individual dispel load on Alliance is going to be less than it would be on Horde. But basically, as you can see, there's 2 ranks of dispel, and they kind of do the same thing, except this one removes an additional friendly debuff and or an additional friendly spell and additional harmful spell. They cost the same amount of mana, so typically you always want to be using rank 2 dispel. However, the only case where you may want to use rank 1 is when you are dispelling someone in a raid environment from like a mind control type mechanic where they have raid buffs on them. And the reason for that is that I believe the mind control always is like the primary target of the dispel first. So that means that if you use a rank 1 dispel, you'll dispel the mind control, but you won't dispel any other buffs. For example, Lucifron is the biggest example of this that, kind of like exists, right? Where he'll mind control your melee. And if you use rank 1, it'll just dispel the mind control. But if you use rank 2, it has a chance to remove like a world buff. For example, like the Onyxia buff or something like that. I'm not sure if they changed them so they can't be dispelled. Like, you might not be able to dispel all of them anymore, but I think it can definitely still dispel something like Songflower. So that would be like the one scenario where you kind of want to use Dispel rank 1, but for everything else we're using Dispel rank 2. And I know we just talked about we're not going to get super in detail of like the encounters, but this is one where like there's just no other reason why you would use anything other than Dispel rank 2, right? Except for a very specific example. So basically, if somebody's like mind controlled and you have a chance of dispelling other things on them, doing collateral damage, that's the only time you would use rank 1 dispel. And yeah, you're just going to be dispelling a ton, especially in an instance like Molten Core. So you want to have this on a comfortable keybind and always be ready to use it, basically. Now, Divine Spirit is just a buff you're going to have on you, obviously. Inner Fire is a buff you should have on you all the time. I just want to show you something really quick with Inner Fire. So we're at 12% mitigation without it. If we use it, and this isn't even talented or anything, which I don't necessarily recommend you talented it, but I'm just saying, we use the max rank Inner Fire, and we're at 28%, right? So we've basically gone like 16 mitigation points higher, and then if we pop, I don't know if I have one on me, I don't, but if you use a greater defense, I think you get into like the 30s even, which is really nice, even for raid, because you can sometimes have things like randomly pull off the tank, especially on Gar, for example. Like Gar ads are notorious for hitting healers because what'll happen is they'll get banished, and then they'll be getting healing aggro during the banish because nothing else can build threat on them, right? Obviously, and then they come out of the banish and they start wailing on your healer. So just having 16, 18, 20% more MIT is huge against physical. And you can see it has a 10-minute duration, doesn't cost that much mana, so it's very easy to keep this up at all times if you're diligent about it. And you're never really going to run it out via the number of charges here. See, it has 20 charges because you're not going to get hit that often in raids, right? So you really just have to worry about refreshing it once every 10 minutes. You can make a weak aura for that. I'm not even perfect on that. I don't have all my weak auras set up, but just something to keep in mind. It is something you want to have on, like especially in like a hardcore type environment, but realistically in any environment, right? So yeah, that's pretty good ability right there. Now, Inner Focus. So Inner Focus is like the thing that makes you crit. It's on a 3-minute cooldown. It gives you 25% additional chance to crit, and it makes your next spell completely free. So this is going to be something where in the most ideal circumstance, you can use this to kind of extend your time in the 5-second rule. So what do I mean by that? Like, I think I can actually show you potentially. So if I cast, right, you'll see this is like a 5-second rule timer, so it's counting down until my regen starts again, right? Just started then. So let me cast again, right? We'll get into the blue here, and then we will we'll let it tick down. Okay, so now we're in normal regen, and I'll cast on myself, and it should... See how it keeps going? It keeps going because when you use Inner Focus, it doesn't actually, since there's no mana cost in the spell, it basically counts as like if you didn't even cast a spell, essentially, right? So it allows your regen to keep going. So that's something to keep in mind with it. It's kind of like the primary thing, but it's not super significant to use it that way in raid because most of the time, you're going to be kind of chain casting directly after anyways, right? So you're not getting a ton of benefit by using this on a spell to extend the duration of the 5-second rule. That's more of a dungeon thing. We'll get into that in the dungeon video. But it is something you should just know about in general. And then a lot of people use this just to buff because, 3k mana cost on the Prayer of Fortitude here is pretty insane, right? And, so you can use it to buff fort. But when you have fort already on and you're in the raid and you're gaming, you're healing, I think that the best things you can use it on typically are max rank greater heal, right? So rank 4 greater heal or rank 4 prayer of healing. Now obviously rank 4 prayer of healing is going to be the ideal use case for this. Sometimes I'll just if I know the instance is going to give me has the potential to give me a shot at using it, then I'll sometimes save it a little bit to use with Prayer of Healing rank 4 because there's not a ton of other instances where using it gets you a lot of value if you're not using it with Prayer of Healing, right? If you're not using it to buff or you're not using it with Prayer of Healing, it doesn't really gain you a ton of value. So it's okay, in my opinion, to kind of let the cooldown sit for a little bit, try and use it with Prayer of Healing. It kind of depends a little bit, I guess. Like if you're in a group or in a particular situation in a raid where you just feel like you're never getting to cast this, right? Then, just use it on Flash Heal, use it on Greater Heal rank 4. But if you're getting enough opportunities, even if there's not a ton of them, but there's a couple in some cases, right? I would really try and pair it with rank 4 Prayer of Healing because it just makes the Prayer of Healing even that much more effective, and it's completely cost-free, which would be 1,000 mana. So you get a ton of value out of Inner Focus using it in that way. So just a couple things to keep in mind there. And it's not really a major part of your raid healing or anything like that, but it's just something you should be aware of and know about, essentially. Going into the next ability here, we have Renew. So Renew is your hot, basically. Something about Renew that you should know is that you cannot have two Renews on the same target from like different priests. Basically, what will happen is the one that is the highest amount of healing will overwrite the other one, right? So people will say like, oh, that means you have like one priest and he's designated as the Renew priest. I mean, usually that's not really the case. Some guilds probably do that, but I think that's not really necessary in most cases. It's something that kind of sorts itself out in the sense that people who aren't the number one, well, not number one necessarily, but like, you know, that aren't the highest healing priest will kind of realize that their Renew is not applying, and they will kind of like stop using it in situations, in more generalized situations, and then you can still have the option to use it, obviously, in certain other situations. So how effective do I think Renew ultimately is? So in raids, it's a pretty bad spell most of the time, in my opinion. I think it has the potential to be okay, because there's lots of things like Warlock's tapping, right, or running to the next pack. You can use Renews to kind of like keep healing up there, and then you can go into drinking, and you're still doing healing while you're drinking, right? So there's like application in that sense, but the main problem is that Renew tends to get sniped, because the name of the game in vanilla WoW, especially in the earlier raids, tends to be, especially by the way for like kind of casual or pug type groups, the name of the game is basically we're going to overstack the raid with healers, and we're just going to make sure that there's so many healers in the raid that there's way more healing than is necessary. So what it basically leads to is like the healers are trying to put back health as quickly as possible, and they don't really care so much about efficiency because they just don't really need to because there's so many healers in the raid, right? So it's like the odds of like, I'd rather have this guy at 100% health than let Renew tick him up over 6 to 9 seconds, and maybe something weird happens, he pulls threat, he dies because he wasn't capped, etc., right? So you're going to run into a lot of those scenarios where you're going to be applying Renew on people, and it's just going to get sniped. So how I like to use Renew is I tend to wait until the raid mana is sort of low. Now, you can get a weak aura for this, which I will show you. You'll probably see in my next raid. I actually didn't have it for this raid, but it basically shows you the mana state of like all the casters, and then what it'll do is you just kind of base using Renew off of the mana bars that you see on the weak aura, right? So the lower people get, that means like the less they can snipe it, and you can keep putting out more Renews, right, that are actually going to have effective value. Thank you, Bale. I'm just doing a little video right here, but I really appreciate that, and I'm glad you like the content. You'll be seeing a new video soon. I guess you're getting a sneak peek if you're watching now. But yeah, so Renew is like it again. It's a good spell, right? But in terms of making practical use of it, it's just tough. It also scales with 100% of your plus healing, and the plus healing is essentially divided up over the ticks. It ticks every 3 seconds for 15 seconds. So it's very good at using your plus healing. It's just, again, it's kind of tough to use in every case, and you definitely want to use it in cases where raid mana is lower, and that's where you get the most value out of it. Also, there'll probably be questions about, do you want to keep Renew on the tanks, right? And my answer to this is generally no, unless there's a fight like again, we don't want to get too specific into fights right now for this video, but there's a fight in Naxxramas called Menexia. It's like a big spider boss, and she stuns the raid for like 8 seconds, including the tank and all the healers and stuff like that. So the idea is that you can load up your tank with hots before this goes out, and that helps them survive for that particular mechanic. So in a situation like that, it's perfectly fine. But generally speaking, I don't really like keeping Renew on the tanks because it basically is almost never the differential in terms of what is going to save them, in my opinion, because each individual tick comes once every 3 seconds, and the ticks, even if you have like a lot of plus healing, Like, the max I've ever had it really heal for in phase 1 is like 300 and something per tick, which sounds like okay, right? But remember, it's every 3 seconds. So it's going to be kind of rare that this is the deal breaker. Kind of, like this is what's going to have saved the tank in any given situation. I will say that it's better if you're gonna use it on a tank at all, and you're gonna try and keep it up on any sort of tank. It's probably better to keep it up on off tanks when they are tanking, as opposed to like a main tank, because the main tanks in your raid, everybody is like familiar with them, right? And everybody should be looking out for them in their health bar, and they're probably given the tank a sign or whatever, so that they're even put in a special position on raid frames, stuff like that. So there's a lot of attention that goes into them, which means that, again, if you put Renew on them, it's going to be super likely to just be pure overkill. But if you put it on an off tank, when he's tanking like a lava pack or something like that, there's sometimes where these tanks can kind of like slip under the radar. Like usually, obviously these tanks have healers assigned to them, but usually it's just like 1 or 2 healers, right? And if it's only 1 or 2 healers, then maybe that healer's drinking, maybe he's kind of doing something else, maybe he's spaced out. There's a whole bunch of things that could kind of be the case, right? And not everybody in the raid is specifically going to be looking at that off tank in the way that they would look at your main tank or like the main off tank. You know what I mean? They're not looking at like the 4th tank you use on lava packs nearly as much. So Renew has a better chance of getting value if you're trying to heal those types of tanks, right? Because they're just going to be healing or receiving healing less consistently. But again, for the main tanks, it's just they get flooded with so many heals that it's very unlikely this is ever going to be the make or break thing. And it just doesn't it costs kind of too much mana to want to roll it at all times, in my opinion, is the problem. It especially because they can like interrupt your regen and stuff, right? It's just not that great. So that's kind of like my thoughts on Renew. And it's definitely going to be one of those spells where you'll have to play in your own raid and kind of play it by ear and kind of analyze things yourself, how the raid mana looks at certain points, right? And you'll kind of get used to whether should I be able to use this spell or not. Just to give one quick example, again, in my 2019 Classic guild, which was kind of, I think, substantially worse than the guild I'm in now, I did use Renew quite a bit sometimes on fights like Domo, because they would last longer, and towards the end everybody would be oomed, and I'd be able to roll some Renews in the raid and get a lot of good healing out that way. But in this current guild, we just blow stuff up so fast that it's just it's really difficult to justify using Renew in most cases. So that is Renew. Oh, and what ranks would I use of Renew, right? So I would say I use max rank Renew, right? And then I use like rank 5. You can kind of play around with that depending on your mana, rank 4, rank 6, something like that. But I like rank 5 for an intermediary rank of Renew, so I have those 2 on my bars usually. And one thing about spell ranks, before we get too much further, so spell ranks, you're kind of fine to use anything depending on like how it fits your mana profile, right? So I'm going to give you suggestions in this video for what you should use. But if you think that like rank 5 flash heal, just feels better to you than rank 4, then go ahead and use that instead, right? The one caveat there is that for downrank spells, you want them at least above level 20. So if you got the spell before level 20, that's bad. You don't want to use it. And the reason why is because the spell coefficient, which is what your healing power kind of goes through. So if you have a spell coefficient of 1, you get 100% of the healing power on that spell. If you have a spell coefficient of 0.5, you get half of the healing power on that spell. The spell coefficient is really bad for spells below 20. Okay, so if you look up a guide and you see like all the spell coefficients and you see like Renew as 100% coefficient, it's not going to be 100% coefficient for rank 1 Renew. And the reason why they do that is to prevent you from, in the late game, having they don't want an insane amount of plus healing to completely trivialize kind of like spell ranks, right? Where, this costs so little mana. It costs 27 mana, right? So if by the end game you have like 800 to 1k healing, and you toss a rank 1 renew on somebody, now it's basically doing almost the same. It's basically doing the same healing as a max rank renew that costs 328 mana, right? Obviously, the max rank renew would do double the healing in this case, right? But it's only costing 27 mana, and so you could see how that would be crazy, right? If they didn't just completely butcher the spell coefficients on the lower level spells. So that's something to keep in mind whenever you're kind of doing ranks. Just make sure you know what rank the spell is, okay? So Smite, we're not going to talk about Smite. We're not going to talk about Res. Very obvious use cases. You don't use any of the lesser heals. Don't use Holy Fire. And we are going to talk about, we'll talk about the main heals, right? So heal and then greater heal. Now, some people like to separate these. I view them as one continuum, right? So, and you can kind of see that when I'll show you the numbers. So 300 to 350, 450 to 500, right? You can see it kind of keeps going up, and then Greater Heal 1 basically picks up right where the other one left off, right? And same for Greater Heal rank 2, same for Greater Heal rank 3, etc., right? And so this is one big continuum, and don't let the differentiation of Greater Heal versus normal heal mess with you, right? They're all kind of like the same spell, so you can view anything that's not Greater Heal rank 4 essentially as like a down rank. They all have the same mana cost, they all have the same coefficient. So what I typically do is I have rank 4 heal. You see that's like right here, right? And then I have rank 4 greater heal if I want to cast a max rank, and then I'll use rank 1 or rank 2. You can't see all my binds here because I have a bunch of them hidden. This bar should actually be hidden too, but I don't know why it's not at the moment. But yeah, I'll use rank 4 normal heal, and then I'll use probably rank 2 greater heal, just because there's not like a ton of difference between rank 4 and rank 1 here, right? So I'll use rank 2, rank 4, and then rank 4 of the greater heal. And most of the time you're only pairing, I would say, rank 4 greater heal with something like Inner Focus, unless you have a really good idea that you're going to be able to cast this and get full value out of it, right? And that's why we're mainly casting rank 4 heal and rank 2 greater heal, because they're not going to do like a ton of overhealing on most things, right? Like they're healing for a good chunk of the target's health, but we don't risk just completely overhealing even on a crit or something like that, right? So that's why we kind of will use those ranks. My bread and butter is pretty much rank 4 heal, though. Like, I use this most, I would say. So I use rank 4 heal the most when I'm using the normal heals, at least. And then it would be like rank 2 greater heal, and then it would be rank 4 is the one we use rarely. And that's how I would break down the 2.5 second spell cast. And in terms of like what you're going to be using these on, again, it kind of goes back to the renew angle, where because the meta is so just about overstacking healing to make sure that people don't die and lose their buffs, what tends to happen is a lot of the raid you're just going to be spamming flash heal, right? But there will be times where mana's low, and you can sense that from just playing after a bit, or you might have the weak aura that tells you people's mana, and you can see that, okay, mana's low, I'm going to transition to get a bit more value out of my spells, right? Because they're not just going to be completely sniped at every turn. So yeah, then at that point you just start using rank 4 heal a lot more, maybe rank 2 greater heal, rank 1 greater heal, and yeah, that's when I'll transition over to those usually. Another option for using these spells more frequently is if you are just like purely tank healing, right? And what you would basically do is you have the tank moused over or whatever, and you're just like I gotta say I'm the tank here, right? And you start casting the heal, and then if they're still full life by the time it ends, you can cancel it. there'll be some situations where, you know, you may just let it go through if you've seen that, because you can kind of get a sense of the boss hit timing based on how the tank is taking damage, but it's not exactly, because keep in mind that the tanks also have a lot of active mitigation sometimes, right? So they'll have stuff like dodge and parry, so they might not take any damage for like 3 or 4 hits and then take damage the next hit. But you can kind of get a sense of when the attacks are coming in, and you can kind of play off that, right? So there'll be some times where you'll see me let a heal go through because I just have an instinct that, the damage is going to come in right after, or basically right as my heal is coming in. But most of the time, you're just kind of cancel casting like this, and if it's full health, you just kind of let him be. You can do the same thing with rank 4 greater heal, right? And this cancel casting technique is going to be something you can use a lot. You can also you can make a bind to stop casting as well, so you don't have to necessarily move at all or disrupt your character. But it's it's not really a huge difference either way. So that's the how you're going to use your heals most of the time. And then what I would say your bread and butter in most raids is going to be are your flash heals, right? And the reason why is because damage comes out very fast in raids most of the time, especially on trash, I would say. There'll be some boss scenarios, and this can kind of apply to almost any version of World of Warcraft, where, you are assigned to a tank or something, you have a very good idea of what's going to be going on, and you can predict damage very well, and you can basically just use your normal efficient heals. So for example, on a fight like Golemag, if your tank is tanking a dog, in my experience, that type of healing tends to be like, it doesn't hit too hard, right? Like, it doesn't hit so hard, but it hits hard enough to warrant using something like maybe greater heal rank 2, but you don't have to spam it necessarily to keep the tank up. So you'll just be kind of hovering them, and you'll be like, you'll let it go through this time, maybe you don't let it go through the next time. You just kind of play it by ear like that, and doing that will be perfectly fine to keep a tank up in that type of situation. But there'll be other fights where the damage that is coming out is like just a lot higher. Like Ragnaros is one fight, for example, in tier 1 here with Molten Core, where if your tank is not using a lot of fire res, he can actually hit quite hard and do quite a bit of burst damage, because your tank is basically going to get no partial resist, no anything, right? So you can really blow a tank up if you're not using any FR, which a lot of tanks, don't like using, essentially. So in that case, that's when we'll talk about the flash heals, and that's what you're going to be using a lot, in my opinion, because it's much more common that you're going to have burst damage, right, than kind of like sustained chunk damage. Like, in pretty much all of the scary damage is burst damage, right? Any type of like mob that does low consistent damage on a, easy auto attack swing or whatever, that's going to be a breeze to heal, no matter which heal you use, really, right? But most things are just not going to be like healing a Core Hound off tank on Golemag. It's going to be very spiky, sometimes multiple mobs connect in the same person. Sometimes what can happen is a thrash, which is when a mob is at distance from somebody. Sometimes they store attacks up when they can't get to that person. Then they get to that person, they unleash all the attacks at once. It's kind of like a buggy thing. I don't think it's really intended, but it's just a mechanic that's kind of been in the game since, forever, since 2004. So situations like that can create insane spike damage. And that's why you honestly heavily lean into flash heal a lot when you raid. It seems counterintuitive, right? Because you're thinking like, oh, this should be the heal that you use to kind of bail you out in the bad situations, and you shouldn't be using it consistently, right? But again, in a raid environment, it's just a little bit different because you're overhealing it most of the time, and because you're overhealing it, the only thing you care about is that the tank doesn't die, or the warrior doesn't die, doesn't lose the world buffs or whatever. Which means that you're willing to commit more resources, and in some cases overcommit resources, sacrifice a little bit of efficiency, right, in order to ensure that these people stay alive, keep their buffs, etc. So in terms of what I use for flash heal, I basically use 2 of them. I use rank 7 flash heal, and then I use rank 4. There's some debate if you want to use rank 4 or rank 5. You can just use whatever one feels better. There's not a necessarily right answer here, right? It's just obviously one heals a little bit more and costs a little more. One heals a little bit less and costs a little bit less. The rank 7 flash heal is pretty self-explanatory, right? Because you want to have this in your toolkit because you need to be able to bail people out of those bad situations, right? And rank 7 flash heal is going to be the best tool you have outside of shield to allow yourself to do that. But then why rank 4 flash heal, right? And why rank 4 over rank 5? Well, rank 4 flash heal, in my opinion, just heals a little bit less, costs a little bit less mana, but that's kind of like what I'm looking for because I'm using it in a different way than I'm using rank 7. Like if I'm using rank 7, I'm using rank 7 because I know that person's health needs to be put back immediately, right? And I need to heal the most amount possible. So I'm defaulting to rank 7 because that's the highest rank possible. When I use rank 4, I'm kind of like spot healing a little bit, but I'm healing people with rank 4 that I don't think are in imminent danger, but they maybe just sort of touch, below 100% or something, and I want to keep them closer to 100% so that when they get hit with a big hit, they don't instantly die. So the idea with rank 4 is it doesn't actually have to do a lot of healing in most cases. It's kind of just like a touch-up heal, just to kind of get people back to close to 100%. And if it doesn't quite get them to 100%, it's usually not the end of the world. They'll kind of usually get there from another heal, or sometimes, they'll take damage from something else, and then they'll get full healed at that point. So it's not necessarily like critical. Like if we're using rank 4 flash heal, we feel the situation is not critical, basically, right? But it could become critical if we let their health keep kind of like decaying down at a slow pace. So we want to keep their health close to 100% as possible, so when the big hit comes in, they have the best chance of surviving it. And how I like to think about rank 4 versus rank 5 flash heal is I like to factor in world buffs. Okay, and world buffs, they're going to be Onyxia at this point, as well as Rend and Songflower. And what I'm really thinking of in this case is Songflower and Onyxia, because Onyxia gives 10% spell crit and Songflower gives 5%, right? So you get 15% spell crit right there, okay? And then I think you have 5% spell crit base, which puts you like 20% spell crit, and then every 60 int, you get a spell crit, so that puts you at like around like 25, 26, just from like normal int values. This is even going to be higher in raid. And then your talents, as you can see here, you're going to have at least some points into Holy Specialization. So you're kind of going to be close to like 30% crit. And especially once you get your Benediction, which gives 2% crit, you're actually going to be very close to 30% crit. So when you're in a raid scenario and you're fully buffed, which means that it's not a trivial chance to crit on your spells. And, spell crit is usually not seen as a very preferred stat for healers, and I would agree. And the main issue with it kind of is that you can't predict that you're going to crit, obviously, even if you have a decent amount of it. So you can't really be casting spells with the thought process of like, oh, I'm just going to use this lower rank spell because I know it's going to crit and heal the amount I need. You can't really do that, right? Because you don't have any control over your crit. It's just RNG. So, but the one scenario that you can kind of lean into that crit a little bit and kind of take advantage of it, right, is on something like a touch-up heal. Because again, what we're trying to do with rank 4 flash heal, we're not necessarily trying to make sure that the target is fully topped off, right? We just want to get them, they've taken a little bit of damage, we want to put that damage back, but it doesn't necessarily have to heal them to full. And what that does is it kind of gives us some leeway, right? Because now if we crit, we're not just wasting all of the extra heal to overheal, right? Because we're not using a heal that's meant to necessarily bring them back to 100% completely. So we're kind of allowing ourselves to save a little bit of mana, and we're leaning into that crit aspect, right? Where, they're probably going to be at 90% at least, even if it doesn't crit. But if it crits, we basically top them off, and we don't do as much overhealing. essentially, right? We get more use out of that crit, right? Like that heal goes much further. So that's how I like to kind of use rank 4 flash heal, to like lean into, just like your natural critical strike chance that you're going to get from being raid buffed. And that's why I use rank 4 over rank 5, right? Because I feel like you don't really need that little extra healing, and you don't need that extra mana cost when you're doing kind of touch-ups on portions of the raid, right? When you're just trying to do a little bit of spotting. As the game progresses, as mobs start to hit harder and stuff like that, you get more mana. You can maybe swap from rank 4 to 5, right? But I think especially early on in the game, early in MC, using rank 4 for the touch-up stuff is completely fine. But yeah, most of the time you're going to be using the max rank, and you're going to be like cancel casting it on people. You're either going to be cancel casting it on tanks, or you're going to be just like searching for like low people, if your tank is okay or if you're not assigned to tanks, and you're going to want to be bailing them out with a quick flash heal. Let's go back into the spellbook here. And I think that's all the stuff in the Holy Tree, right? You have Abolish Disease here. I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory. There's no real tech, like with the Dispel and the different ranks. It is what it is. One thing I will say about this is I believe that unlike other hot type things, this does attempt the cure immediately. So if you did need to cleanse a disease like immediately for whatever reason, even if they already had Abolish Disease on them, you could reapply Abolish Disease to cleanse that. You know what I mean? So a lot of times you're going to be casting this and just let it sit. But if for some reason you needed that disease immediately purged, you could just recast it in order to clear that disease, I think. So that's something to just note about Abolish Disease. I'm just going to go into the Shadow Tree a bit, and I think the only thing we want to talk about here really is Fade. Shadow Protection is just obvious, in certain scenarios you're going to use this. You don't really use your Fear much in Raid because most stuff is immune to it. But if you do find mobs that aren't, obviously it can be good to save you at some points, but you have to be careful because Fearing in an instance is always a little bit sketch if there's other packs around. Now, Shadow Word Pain, this doesn't really have much application. I see some people, I just want to go over this because I do see this sometimes, where some people will be like, oh, well, can you keep Shadow Word Pain up on a boss to do a little bit extra damage? And it's like, yeah, you could, but it's really just like a waste of mana. Like, you're not doing any type of significant damage, keeping Shadow Word Pain on a boss. It's just not really a thing, right? It also has a high chance to get resisted on raid bosses. The one exception sometimes is if you have a lot of extra mana on a fight like Phase 1 Onyxia, right? You can put a Shadow Word Pain on Onyxia when she goes into the air for a bit of extra damage. And if you're not struggling for mana during Phase 2 or something like that, you can put, another Shadow Word Pain on her or something like that, and then Wand. But it's really just about how much mana you have, how much mana the rest of your healers have. Are you kind of in mana trouble? That's what's going to decide whether you use the spell at all. And in most cases, it's just not going to make much of a difference. But in a case like Onyxia, where damage on her can be limited in a certain phase due to her being in the air, obviously you can kind of help out a little bit to bring her down quicker. If like all the priests do it, and you're wanding and stuff as well. So just a quick note on that. Let's get into this. So we have Fort, obviously. These are just like the normal buffs, right? You're not going to be shackling much at this point in the game, but you will shackle some stuff in Nax eventually. Not much to be said there. Not really doing much levitating. But the last and final thing to talk about here is Power Word Shield, which is arguably the most important pre-spell, I think, actually. Power Word Shield is, I think it's like kind of what separates it. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of things that separate Priest and Shaman, but it's one of the biggest separators between Priest and Shaman and Priest and any other healer. And it's one of the things that makes Priest the best healer in the game and is like the most powerful healer, right? Being able to simply prevent damage that, instead of like having to wait until it comes out and then actively heal it, is just something that no other class can do, right? Multiple classes share HOTS, multiple classes share some type of AoE heal, but no class has like a preventative type heal like Power Word Shield, and it's incredibly powerful. Now, there's kind of a lot of functionality that this ability has and a lot of different ways you can use it, and we're kind of going to go through all of them here, right? So the most obvious use for shield is just in emergency scenarios, right? So somebody's getting low, in most cases a tank, right? And you will put powered shield on them like so, and hopefully save their life. That's the most obvious use, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about how you do that and how not to do it, right? So if you look at the ability, you'll see it has a 4-second cooldown, right? So that's the actual cooldown on you casting the shield itself. So if I cast it, I can't use it for another 4 seconds, okay? And then on top of that, you see we get a weakened soul debuff when I cast it, right? Which lasts, well, I'll have to wait for this one to expire. I believe it's like 14 seconds, 15 seconds, yeah. So you can see I'll cast it again, I get the weakened soul debuff. Now, what this means is that the target itself can't get another shield for 15 seconds. So you can keep casting more shields every 4 seconds, but the target that was recently shielded can't get it for 15 seconds. It's a pretty important thing to keep in mind on tanks, right? Because you don't want to be spamming this like willy-nilly on tanks. And the reason is because obviously you want to save it for a spot where they really need it. And if they already have a weakened soul debuff, they can't be shielded again, right? Now, in a lot of cases, as long as you don't have a priest that's just spamming shield on the tank, this isn't really a problem because your tank isn't really going to have multiple critical moments within 15 seconds of each other most of the time, unless like it's like a very specific fight or something like that. So the weakened soul component is not really something you have to consider a ton. It's just you don't want to incur it all the time by casting the shield out frivolously, right? But also, don't be afraid to cast the shield because of weakened soul, right? If you see a tank just drop suddenly, just put a shield on them. It's basically never the wrong call to put a shield on the tank that just got like smacked, right? Yeah, there's don't like overthink this, you know what I mean? It's like one of the best things you can do for sure. Another case of shields, so we'll kind of go into like the second thing, is on mortal striked targets. So there'll be some bosses in the game like Baron Rivendell, and then there's a boss in Blackwing Lair called Broodlord, and they will basically hit your tank with a mortal strike debuff that reduces healing that goes onto the tank. Now, this is a very opportune time to kind of use shield, right? Because it doesn't suffer from the mortal strike debuff because it's an absorb and not a heal. So when you see that mortal strike come out, the tank's health drops, you shield them immediately, right? And ideally, what you're going to want is, for a fight where you know it's coming, you may actually want a priest sort of like assigned to do it. And the reason for that is so the other priests don't have to like interrupt their casting routine to shield the tank. So for example, you'll notice even though this ability is instant, right? When I cast it on myself, it does incur the GCD. You can see it, right? So I'll kind of I'll just wait for it again to show you. You can see the GCD on my heal ability right here. So what that means, I'll show you, right? I'll cast the shield, and then I'll immediately try and heal. Can't cast it. Now I can cast it, right? So when you do cast the shield, you will incur the GCD, which means that you can't cast the next heal quite as quickly. Now this doesn't happen with a spell like Flash Heal, because the GCD is basically the same length as the actual cast time of the spell, since it has a cast time, right? So you can immediately go into chaining Flash Heal after Flash Heal after Flash Heal, because the GCD lasts the same period as the spell. So just something to note, that if you are going to shield somebody, you are going to be vulnerable in terms of not being able to cast heals for the next like 1.5 seconds, right? And that's why in circumstances where you know something's going to happen, like a Mortal Strike, it can be advantageous to have people assigned to doing it, because you don't have other people trying to like spam shield on a target that can't be shielded, essentially, because somebody else already got it, right? And then not only that, but the target that knows they shielded it actually then can't heal the target for another like 1.5 seconds, right? So it just kind of delays the next cast of the heal. And if other people are trying to shield and they're getting like the error, that's a lot of times just enough time to kind of like throw them off, right? Like they're spamming their shield, they're like, oh, there's already a shield on, but by then they've already lost like precious milliseconds, right, in terms of starting up their next heal. So it would be better if they're already just precasting on the tank, right, and a specific person is doing the shielding, okay? And then that way that person does the shield, and hopefully a precast is already like about ready to land. It comes in right after and boosts the tank's health up. Now again, though, this is really only applicable in cases where you know the ability is coming, right? So it's not so applicable, in my opinion, in a case where somebody just randomly takes a burst of damage. In that case, I would much rather have all of my priests just trying to get the shield, right? Because keep in mind, there's not only priests in the raid, right? There's shamans and stuff like that. And what you don't want is you don't want to have a priest assigned to be like the shield priest or whatever, and then they shield, right? And like most of the time, but then maybe there's a time where they're just off their game or whatever, or they're not paying attention, they don't see the tank get low, and they're not shielding. Nobody else is now shielding because, well, it's the shield's priest's job to shield, and the shield doesn't go out, the tank dies. You don't want stuff like that, right? It's just not necessary. So in cases where you can predict what's going to happen, it's fine to have there be like kind of like a shield priest, but in cases where just a burst of damage comes out, you just want anybody on there getting that shield, whoever is fastest, right? Because sometimes like the faster player is actually going to make the difference, right? Getting the shield on there the fastest. That's kind of my take on the whole, like, do we assign somebody to shield, or do we let it be the Wild Wild West? It just depends on the circumstance, right? On an ability that you know is coming, fine to have an assignment, but otherwise you want other people to kind of like intervene there, right? The next case, speaking of timely use of shields, is you can use shields to kind of like, in some cases, preemptively prevent like damage on a mechanic, right? So a great example of this is a lot of the dragon bosses, they will actually have like a cast time for their breath, right? Sometimes they'll even have like a little bit of an animation. So what you can do actually is you can shield during that cast time or animation, and then when the breath comes out, which is like the high hitting ability, the tank already has a shield on them, which means that during the burst damage, they already have the shield, so they take less damage to their actual HP. And not only that, but since you did the shield kind of beforehand, right, your global cooldown is coming back sooner than it would be if you reactively shielded. So let's say like a Blackwing Lair, like one of the Drake bosses, is doing their breath, right, and you just let the breath hit and then you cast shield. So that's fine, right? Not the worst thing in the world. Better that you shielded than you didn't shield. But now you're locked out of healing for 1.5 seconds, and like I said, you're kind of counting on your other teammates to be on the ball, and hopefully they have heals casted, right? But if you preempted the breath because you saw the casting of the breath, right, and then you casted a shield immediately, your global cooldown is now already ticking, right, before the damage has even come out. So the damage from the breath comes out, the tank is now not as hurt, right, and you are much closer to being able to get that flash heal started, right? So it's just a much better situation pretty much whenever you can do that. Also, there'll be some things that can do like Nefarian, for example. can do a breath that does a lot of damage into like a cleave, which also does a lot of damage. And depending on the tank's gear, if he's got Death Wish up, if there's a Warrior Call on Nefarian, right? A lot of these things can kind of come together to create a situation where it's very easy for the tank to actually get globaled. And having the shield out beforehand to prevent some of that breath damage, right, is actually huge in being able to, and then also being able to react quicker in the aftermath of casting the shield, right, is huge to be able to bail the tank out of those situations where, you know, in an average guild, he may have just died, right? So preempting stuff can be really powerful with the shield. You just have to, you have to be sure about that it's going to happen when you do it, because obviously, like, the worst thing you can do is if you're trying to do this thing where you preempt like a Dragon's Breath or something, is if you cast the shield like before the cast starts, right? And then the mob just autos the shield down. Now there's weakened soul on your tank, and the breath is coming, and you have no recourse against it at all, right? So you obviously want to kind of make sure that when you're doing it, you actually like do time it right? Otherwise, it's just strictly worse. So that's kind of like the third case scenario, is like kind of blocking very dangerous abilities with it. And I would say that I was going to only have 4, but I think I'll do 5. 4 is make sure to not be afraid to use shield on yourself. So most of the time you're going to be using shield on like tanks and warriors and stuff like that, people in direct threat. But if you see a situation start to get sketchy, you want to shield yourself immediately. So for like example, if a lava pack goes bad in MC, right, just toss a shield on yourself, because you staying alive is going to be integral to helping other people stay alive, right? So if you're dead, yeah, you can't help or heal anybody. So definitely always make sure that if you ever feel threatened by anything that's going on in the raid, just like a kind of a good thing to do immediately is throw a shield up on yourself. And, you know, maybe it's the difference maker that helps you live. It's the same thing with when you're getting aggro. You want to fade and shield, depending on if you know the hit's going to hit you first, you want to shield first, then fade. If you think you can drop aggro by fading first, then fade first. But, yeah, definitely don't be afraid to shield yourself. Definitely super underrated, right? Like, I've seen a lot of priests die in situations where they could have just easily shielded themselves, like on Saffron or something. And if they shield themselves, they would have lived. But if they, you know, they kind of didn't think to shield themselves and they died. So don't be afraid to use that. Use it liberally when it comes to playing your life. And then the fifth kind of application, I would say, of shield, which is one a lot of people don't think of, is kind of like pre-shielding people before pulls. Now, this one is a little bit contentious, specifically with the warrior community. Why is that, right? Well, because if you shield a warrior, he doesn't get rage for the damage that's shielded. So typically how a warrior works is when they do damage, they get rage, and then when they take damage, a percentage of that is converted to rage, basically. Basically, I think it's like probably how much a percentage of the health of damage they take or something. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but basically when they take damage, they get rage. Now, when you shield them, like I said, they don't get rage for the shielded portion of the damage taken, which means that a tank, which wants a lot of rage, right, to be able to spam abilities, keep Heroic Strike queued, stuff like that, they, in some cases, would rather not be shielded so that they can get more rage, right? And in particular, at the start of a pull tends to be like the worst time for them to get a shield, because that's when they have very little rage, and they kind of count on the mob's initial hit, hitting them for a bunch and generating a lot of rage for that, right? Because they might not hit the mob their first hit. They could miss. It could be a dodge, a parry, right? Even if they do hit, they're not hitting for like a ton all the time, right? Maybe they didn't crit or something. So basically, there'll always be this thing where warriors are like, oh, don't shield me on the pull, you know, like don't shield me going in. It hurts my rage, right? And there's that's generally good advice, I would say. Like, you don't want to be just shielding the tank for no reason at the start of every pull, right? However, there are definitely certain pulls and certain circumstances where shielding the tank beforehand is a good thing. Actually, it was funny. Tonight was a case in Raid that perfectly highlighted why you want to pre-shield tanks in some cases. So we were doing Gar, which is a fight with multiple adds, and basically in this fight, it's kind of tricky because you mark the adds, but they're all swirling around Gar, right? And when you go in, mobs will proximity aggro you. So what tends to happen is the warriors kind of go into the fight and they're trying to take the ad that they're going to tank, but they usually don't obviously all get in there at exactly the same time, which means that ads can proximity aggro onto like the first person who gets in, which is usually going to be your main tank going for Gar. So it's not uncommon to see a tank just splat going into Gar because they try to pick up Gar or whatever ad they were on, and all the ads just converged on them and hit them at once, right? It's a very easy way to lose a tank on Gar. A shield can sometimes prevent that, right? Sometimes if all the ads were to hit, like if you're doing a no banish strategy, all the ads hit with Gar, shield's probably not saving you, right? But if 3 ads hit with Gar, 2 ads hit with Gar, depending on exactly like how much the tank got hit for, a shield could absolutely save somebody. A shield's going to do probably close to 1100 shielding at this point in the game. Like it's like 1,000 something minimum. And then a little bit of your plus healing as well, 10% of it. So it absolutely could be a life or death. It could be the difference between life and death, right? So I would basically say like any situation where the tank has a chance, like a relatively good chance of taking damage from multiple mobs that's not going to be intended, right? That's not desired, that we're not accounting for, that could be a great situation to use shield. So another one could be Golemag and his 2 ads, right? I've definitely seen a tank get hit by the 2 core hounds and Golemag and instantly splat because he didn't want to shield. I've even seen on Lucifron it happen, although I feel like the ads there don't hit quite as hard. So that's a less common one. I've seen it on Sulfuron for sure. There's a bunch of bosses where just multiple ads connecting at the same time is really, really bad news for your tank, right? Another case where pre-shielding is kind of okay is like if the target you're pre-shielding doesn't need to get like imminent threat on a mob, for example. Like this could be the case with a Core Hound tank on Gar, right? Like personally, I don't really see the problem with shielding the people who are going to tank the Core Hounds on Gar because, nobody's going to be hitting the Core Hounds essentially, right? And those tanks are kind of just as vulnerable as the Golemag tank is, although in some cases maybe not quite as vulnerable because how they're going to be approaching the boss. They're at best probably going to get just Gar and 1 Core Hound hitting them. But, even if only the Core Hound's hitting them, having a shield on the tank before the fight does save you a little bit of healing, right? So, in those types of cases where it's not super important for the tank you're shielding to have aggro on his target, that's usually, absolutely fine to do, right? Because the tank can go in there between hitting it, having taunt, right? They have enough tools to get a little bit of aggro, usually. So usually it's not a problem to shield a tank in those scenarios. So we've got shielding a tank when he's going to definitely probably potentially take lots of incoming hits that are going to be unintended, right? You can also shield a tank in cases where the mob he's getting is not going to be the primary threat target. And then what other times is it good to do pre-shielding, right? Well, for tanks, that's kind of, I would say, pretty much it. But for the rest of the raid, you can do pre-shielding a lot, actually. And there'll be a lot of fights, like Shazara, for example, is a fantastic example from Molten Core, where if you're rolling a bunch of pre-shields out before the fight, you are just preventing a ton of damage that's coming in on the raid. Because especially on a fight like Shadra, it lasts such a short amount of time that every arcane explosion matters, and taking a little bit of damage off the first arcane explosion using no mana and using no like GCD, no cooldowns because the shield was already out there before is really powerful, right? So on Shazra, like I'll do this routine basically where if I have the mana before the fight and we're kind of waiting, I'll be shielding somebody, then sitting. So I'll hit my shield key, then my sit key. And then I'm regenning health as my shield cooldown's coming, right? Then I hit it again. Shield another person. Shield another person. You'll notice the shield lasts, if we put another one on here, shield lasts like 30 seconds basically, right? So you can get quite a bunch of these out kind of going into the fight. And what that means is when the fight starts and that first arcane explosion goes out, you're preventing quite a bit of damage, right? You know, people, they use protection potions and stuff, but shield actually applies before the protection potion. So you're saving people's potion, so they get even more potion uptime, right? People use 2 potions often on a fight like Shadra sometimes if it lasts long enough. And you're basically giving them higher potion uptime because the first potion doesn't get as damage from the first explosion, right? And then you can keep re-shielding them during the fight. It keeps preventing that damage from going into the potion, right? And then by the time their first potion's burned through, they still have the second potion. So it's good in pretty much every scenario, I would say, unless you're like destroying your regen to do it. So if you're not like full mana kind of going into it, maybe I would recommend you just sit and drink as opposed to doing this, right? But if you're full mana, you have nothing better to do. Yeah, casting a bunch of shields before the pull is great. Again, like depending on the boss fight and stuff, you may not want to cast them on the tank, but casting them on other raid members is usually fine, you know? It's really good before lava packs, where just random burst damage can come out. It's really good on the ranged and melee on Ragnaros. It's really great to do on the tech packs and Blackwing Lair. There's tons of scenarios where, you know, having these shields on people preemptively just save you a bunch of mana, right? They save lives. They save like healing, right? And the other good thing about it too is that having a shield on somebody before the fight, basically it's almost like no threat at all. Whereas if you have to bomb a heal on somebody that just took damage on a fight or like a trash pull or something like that, that in some cases has a chance to like rip threat on certain mobs if there's not well-established threat on that particular mob. So pre-shielding is super good, especially on certain bosses, and even on trash pulls, you know. If I have the extra mana, I'll pre-shield on trash pulls. I just don't always have it, but if I do, you'll see me pre-shielding, because the more you know, damage you can absorb for free, then because it's for free. Keep in mind, because you're doing this while staying at 100% mana, right? Because you're casting the shield, and then drinking, taking back to full by the time the next one's ready to be cast. So it really is for free, right? And the more you can be doing this for free, just the more mana you're saving for everybody else in the raid, right? And you're preventing deaths. And the good thing with pre-shielding is that in most cases, like it's very rare that pre-shielding is going to cause somebody to die due to weakened soul, right? Because the people that are shielded are not really intended to be taking direct damage. They're mostly probably going to be taking like secondary AoE damage, right? So nothing would like finish somebody off where they would like require another shield immediately, right? Because they're not directly tanking something. They're just, you know, absorbing like a Shazra Arcane Explosion or something like that. Or taking a Molten Giant Stomp or Molten Destroyer Stomp. You know, just something that's going to do damage to them, but they're usually not taking direct follow-up damage after that. And in a lot of cases, the weakened soul on most of these people is going to be up anyways. It's just the most recently applied person before the pull started, it might be a problem on, so you maybe watch them a little bit. But for everybody else, by the time the pull actually happens, the weakened soul is basically, it's going to be off, right? So yeah, like pre-shielding is like super, super effective in those types of scenarios, and it's a really underrated thing that I think not a lot of priests do that should be done if you're trying to maximize your kind of like effectiveness and output in raid, right? So let's just take a quick look back through here. I think the only thing we didn't really cover is Fade. And I'm going to make a whole separate video on Fade, I think, potentially, but you want to use this spell whenever, you know, whenever you get threat, basically, right? Think of it as like a vanish. It doesn't quite work like that because it doesn't completely take you off the threat table. It just reduces your threat. But in a lot of cases, if you see you have aggro on something, which you can do via nameplates, you can set your nameplates to show like if something's aggroed to you or not, and then you just press Fade, and most of the time you drop aggro completely. There'll be some niche cases like Gar sometimes, like where, you know, you can build up a ton of threat and it can be hard to get something off you. But in a lot of cases, it's very rare that if you press Fade, at least the mob won't go to another healer, which sounds kind of bad, but it can be kind of good, right? Because if you're on Gar and a mob comes out of Banish, you press Fade, right? But you wait to kind of like the last second for it to get to you. Now it's pathing towards another person. So it hasn't had a chance to do any damage yet, right? Because it's come directly for you, and then it's wasted all the time getting to you. You faded. Now it has to go to somebody else. The odds that it wasn't picked up during that time, very low, right? So using Fade intelligently can save you. It can save other raid members, right? It can save the raid a lot of damage, right? It can save a death. It's very good to have this on your bar and be ready to use it, essentially. It's a very strong ability. It's super underrated, I would say. It's something that people look at, they don't really think about putting on their bar, think about using, because they think like, oh, by the time I get into that level of raiding, you know, we're actually doing a raid, like tanks are going to have aggro on everything. And most of the time they will, but there'll be some cases like with lava packs and stuff like that. If the pull kind of goes bad, a lava pack stuns a bunch of people, can't really get threat, you know. There'll be scenarios where Fade is useful for sure. And you want to have it on your bar and have it ready to go when those scenarios come up, basically, right? And, you know, because of how Fade works, you can also use it just kind of like Feint, sort of, right? But in most cases, you don't really need to do that. In most cases, you're probably going to be using it reactively for aggro coming onto you. You can kind of use it like almost preemptively. Like if you know, like if a pull just started, you cast a really big heal or something that just crit onto somebody, maybe you just instantly Fade, you know, to make sure that the next one doesn't rip or something like that. But in most cases, you're going to be using it reactively in raid. In like Onyxia, there could be maybe some arguments for using it over time. What I would say is like you probably want yourself decently high in the threat during phase 2, because when Onyxia fireballs you, you'll lose that threat, right? So you probably want to at least eat one fireball, and then maybe after you eat the first fireball, you keep spamming Fade to keep yourself like a low on the threat meter, right? And give the tanks time to pick it up when phase 3 hits, and that way you're not high, the boss isn't aggroing onto you or anything like that. But again, really not necessary in most cases, because the fireball is most likely going to wipe your threat, and you'll probably be fine. But if you're doing a raid where you know, you bring her down really fast, for example, like you're doing a full 40-man roster and you bring Onyxia down super fast, and then you know, you're still high in the threat table and Onyxia turns to you, fading to get it right back on the tank could definitely be something that, you know, could save the raid, could save your life, could save the lives of a bunch of other people in your raid. So definitely don't sleep on this spell. It's good to have, and you should be ready to use it when necessary. And with that being said, I think that's pretty much the whole priest toolkit. Oh, Prayer of Healing, right? We didn't really talk about Prayer of Healing. Last one, it's kind of escaping. So this is a spell that's going to get used a lot more on Alliance than Horde. And that's because you don't typically get put in melee groups as a priest on Horde. If anything, like usually only some priests will be in melee groups. But on Alliance, you are essentially intentionally spread out to be able to use Prayer of Healing, because Prayer of Healing is the main AoE healing for Alliance, because Alliance doesn't have Chain Heal. Now this spell is just amazing. It's really good. It kind of sucks that it's limited to your group, but it's still very, very strong. The problem is that again on Horde, you're not really getting to use this very often, because typically the melee are the ones that are going to get damaged in a raid, right? And they're going to take uniform damage. So for example, if a Molten Giant stomps, it's going to hit like all the melee, right? And if you get put in a caster group, the casters aren't taking damage. Usually if the casters do take damage, it's like one caster at a time, two casters at a time. And you really don't want to be casting this, in my opinion, on like two people at a time. It's just super inefficient at that point. Sometimes I'll do 3 people if I have Inner Focus up and I don't think I'm going to get another good opportunity to get a big Inner Focus off. I'll do it on 3 people with Inner Focus because it costs no mana basically, right? But other than that, usually waiting till like 4 or 5 people actually need the healing for using this. So on Horde, it's going to be a tough sell in most cases, but on Alliance, it's something you'll be using quite often, because you'll be in the place of the shamans in the group. Like I said, very powerful to pair with Inner Focus. And on Horde, I actually tend to just run 1 rank of this most of the time, which is the max rank. But I do technically have 2 ranks, but for a while I was only running 1. I think running 1 is a little bit trolling. The more you're going to use it, the more you want flexibility, right? So that's why you can kind of get away with running 1 rank of this as Horde, and it kind of just being the max rank. But realistically, I think you want kind of multiple ranks of this. If I was Alliance, I would probably run at least like rank 2 and rank 4. But yeah, just being Horde, you could just run rank 4 and you're probably going to be fine in most cases. Most of the time, the damage that comes in is going to be, because this spell does a lot of healing overall, but not a ton individually per target, right? So if you go to the rank 1, you see it's only 300 per target, and most of the time when a group gets chunked, it's going to be for at least around like 800 to 1k, 1.2k, something like that. So that means that using rank 4 is going to be safe most of the time. But again, it's never bad to have another rank at your disposal, and you're going to be using it a lot more as Alliance. So having like a little bit of a lower rank, getting tongue-tied, this video has been long, to touch up a group or something definitely doesn't hurt. So yeah, I'd use rank 2 and rank 4 probably. Later on, you can use rank 1 when you get like way more plus healing. But at this stage in the game, I would probably run rank 2 and rank 4. And yeah, just keep it in mind for Inner Focus. And if your whole group is damaged, it's pretty much never a bad thing to cast it, unless you need to be casting on a tank or something to save him, obviously, right? Or, obviously, if your group takes damage, but you're not going to take damage again for a bit, and you have low mana, and you need to channel that mana into a tank, then obviously it would be bad to use it then, right? So you do have to still use common sense when you're using it, because it does cost a lot of mana. But if you have the mana and people did take the damage, it's definitely mana efficient to use this spell. So yeah, that is pretty much the whole toolkit, and kind of explaining like when you're going to be using certain spells. This is a long one, but I hope it kind of helped you guys who are interested in the more in-depth stuff. And yeah, so just let me know what you think, and I'll be doing more videos shortly. I'll do one for dungeons, and then I'm also going to do like encounter-specific stuff a little bit later on, and we'll probably do the video on Priest Tier 1 next. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and yeah, talk to you next time. Like, comment, and subscribe.